Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 4HCREAT webinar entitled Cultural and Creative Industries, Collaborate to Co-Create. It's great to have you all here with us this morning. Just to give you a little bit of a background, a week ago we released a number of presentations. They're available on our 4HCREAT website. That's 4HCREAT.eu. They're available in the main output results section. And today we're going to meet those 5 presenters and ask them some questions about their presentations. So this webinar is an opportunity for us, the 4HCREAT project team, to share with you, the viewers, some of the outputs from the project. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Just press the Q&A button on your toolbar and I'll monitor the questions coming in as best I can, and I will relay them to the panelists. The presentation is being recorded, so if you want to watch back at any stage, you can do so. It will be made available on the 4HCREAT website again. Unfortunately, this webinar was due to take place in Quimper in France, but unfortunately we weren't able to do that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And also the same with our final conference. The final conference is being replaced by a series of podcast interviews, which sound very, very interesting. I've listened to a few of them, and they're going to be released in the next few days or a week or so. And again, they'll be made available on the 4HCREAT.eu website for more information there. Okay, let's get started. I see we already have our first panelist with us, Dr. Colin Comby of Glasgow Caledonian University. Good morning, Colin. How are you?
Good morning, John, and good morning, everybody listening.
How is everything in Glasgow this morning?
Things are good. We are having a little bit of an easing of the lockdown conditions, and the weather has been good, so people are a little bit more optimistic now.
Very good, very good. Well, Colin, we'll start maybe by, do you want to introduce yourself to the viewers? Just say a few words.
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Dr. Colin Coombe. I'm the Senior Lecturer in Management at Glasgow Caledonian University, and also the lead partner for the 4HCREAT project.
So your presentation, Colin, is about the project in general. It gives an overview of the project, and then it also talks about the capitalization and sustainability aspects of the project. Can you just tell us a little bit about the main aims and outputs of the 4HCREAT Interreg project?
Yes, the 4HCREAT project is looking to generate knowledge sharing models so that we can disseminate information and results from a range of research institutions across to the cultural and creative industries. I think what differentiates this project is the quadruple helix approach that we've taken. I think most people are familiar with the triple helix, which is of course business, higher education institutions, government. But we've extended that to add another dimension, which is the end user involvement, and especially around the co-design of new products and services. And in particular, we've been focusing on the demographic of Generation Z, which is the young people born post-2000. So it's a very interesting demographic to look into because they are the ones who are more tech savvy, but they're also interested in co-design and how they can influence the new trends in market demand by exploiting things like digital technology.
And a project like this, Colin, like these Interreg projects, they have a number of partners as well as a number of associate partners. Could you highlight maybe some of the advantages that the associate partners brought to the project?
Yes, we've engaged with quite a number of different associate partners, and each bring with them certain expertise and skills and knowledge. So, for example, when it comes to specific knowledge around key sectors of the cultural and creative industries, we've engaged with the likes of the Cultural Enterprise Office in Glasgow, and they've given us a bit of an insight into the tools and techniques that underpin entrepreneurship and innovation right across the sector. We've also had specific expertise such as in storytelling from Aquitaine in France. We've had support from local and regional authorities, particularly Tipperary, for example, in Ireland, as well as a number of educational institutions, such as the School of Arts in Asturias. So each of them have brought something useful to the table. We've been able to exploit some of that expertise to good effect, and we've got ongoing good relationships with many of these associate partners going forward, which is really adding value to the project.
Absolutely. Quite a diverse collection there. I guess it reflects the diversity of the creative and cultural sector as well. Who are the main stakeholders in the project, Colin, and how did they participate in the project?
Yes, we've engaged with a wide range of different people, especially to do with the content creators, obviously, leading into a number of different commercial enterprises. Those tend to range quite from the micro businesses all the way through to SMEs and one or two of the larger corporations which have been delivering on content. We've also engaged with a wide range of different artists as well, especially around the training programs, and they've been really invaluable in giving us their expertise, especially around some of the techniques that are used to develop artistic and creative output in the commercial sphere. We've also been looking at a number of support agencies, of course. In Scotland, we have Creative Scotland, and they've given a really good insight into policy development across the sector and just exactly how they see strategies for developing the cultural and creative industries going forward. We've also engaged with a number of end users, of course, particularly the Generation Z. And of course, we've been engaging with academics as well, who have produced some interesting outputs around the development of the sectors.
And there's one of the aspects of the project, and indeed this webinar is a manifestation of it, is the capitalization plan. And you spoke a little bit about the capitalization plan in your presentation. Can you give us some more details on sort of the actions that form the capitalization plan?
Yeah, this is a really important aspect of the legacy of the project, because we have four main areas where we're thinking of transferring the results of the project. We have the policy toolkit, which is going to become available quite soon. And that's been developed by Laval Technipol. And that's a really useful document because it gives an outline of some of the good practices and the practical recommendations that have emerged from a range of different activities, whether it be the internships or the training programs, or linked to some of the reports that have been generated in the project. These are tools and techniques that practitioners will find useful going forward. So we're all really excited about the publication of that, which is imminent. We also have the capitalisation seminar, of course, led by Limerick Institute of Technology. And this is an opportunity for transferring results from practitioners, researchers, the training programs that we've run. We engage with entrepreneurs, end users, all with a view to have a better understanding of how the development of the cultural and creative industries has actually played out. We also have the final conference, of course, and this webinar has replaced the physical conference that was due to take place in Quimper. This is an opportunity, of course, for many of the partners to explain their input to the project. And fourthly, we have the sustainability plan. Very important to leave a legacy that people can engage with going forward. So this is about ongoing engagement with the tools and the techniques and the outputs of the project to leave that legacy. So it really focuses on project effectiveness. That means ongoing monitoring and evaluation of how those tools and techniques are used, as well as their impact. All the learning that we've benefited from in the project and how that can be used for bettering future knowledge. And also ongoing engagement with stakeholders and also the wider community, because we have to keep that relevant to their lives as well.
Very good. It sounds like there's hopefully quite a legacy from this project, Colin. And the policy toolkit that you referred to is also a great piece of work. It actually has just been released in the last 24 hours or so, and I've managed to get my hands on a copy of it already. It's quite a substantial document, and we'll be speaking to Valerie and Marianne soon, actually, about that document. So yeah, it's a great piece of work. Before I leave you, Colin, and we move on to the next panelist, can I ask you, what future actions or research could follow on from the output of this 4HCREAT project, do you think?
I think there's lots of opportunities here because we have a much better understanding of the nature of those niche audiences, especially the Generation Z demographic. I think that's something that we need to continue to monitor because it's a fluid and dynamic characteristic. So there's definitely future research possible in the focus around that particular demographic. But we also have a much better understanding of how resources can be deployed to support the cultural and creative industries. But again, this needs further investment and making sure that we understand how those resources can be diffused across different industries, especially because there are slight differences between different countries and regions in the Atlantic area. And it's about gaining the most added value from that deployment of resources. And also we think there is scope for further training, more internships, because there's been huge added value from having people from an artistic background, diffusing their information and knowledge and skills in lots of different areas, not just in the creative industries, but in other traditional industries as well. So there is great opportunities for future research, and hopefully we'll be playing a part in that for some time to come.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the most sort of enjoyable parts of the project, that internship and placing of artists in, as you said, traditional and non-traditional companies. There's no doubt about it. It's a really, really important sector, the creative and cultural industry. It's very diverse.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so lots and lots of research opportunities available. Colin, thanks very much for joining us. As I say, your presentation is available online for anyone who wishes to watch it. It's up on the 4HCREAT.eu website in the main outputs and results section.
Yeah, I'd like just to thank all the partners who have contributed to this project, as well as all the stakeholders that have helped us. Dex Europe for administration. They've all come together effectively to deliver a really impressive output, I think.
Yeah, and I guess it's a little unfortunate that we can't meet in person to sort of for the final conference, and but so be it. Such is life, as they say. Colin, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thanks, John.
And yep, we'll speak again soon. Okay, next up we have Ivan Korbat. Ivan, I am going to ask you to join. There he is. He's a good man. Oh, are you there, Ivan? You could, if you could turn on your camera for us there, Ivan. So Ivan, I'll just bring you up Ivan's presentation. So hi, Ivan, good morning.
Good morning.
You gave a presentation, Ivan, entitled Upgrading RDI of Institutions and CCI Companies to supply the demands of Generation Z consumers. Quite a number of acronyms in that title. RD&I, of course, being research, development, and innovation. The institutions are predominantly sort of public institutions that support the creative and cultural institutes. CCI, of course, being creative and cultural industries. Generation Z, of course, being roughly those aged between 10 and 22. Before we start talking about your presentation, Ivan, do you want to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thanks. Good morning, John, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ivan Korbat. I'm expert on cultural management and international cooperation, working at Grupo Dex in Spain. So we are based in northern Spain, in the region of Asturias. In this specific research, we have collaborated with Seville Chamber of Commerce, which is partner in 4HCREAT project.
So your talk presented the results of a survey. Just bring up, I have a slide there on it. Yeah, so your talk presented the results of a survey conducted as part of this 4HCREAT project that looked at the habits and demands, as you call them, of Generation Z, so that the creative and cultural industries could hopefully identify new innovations as well as business and R&D opportunities that address the needs of this generation. So that was sort of one aspect of the survey, but the survey also explored the existing levels of innovation within companies working within the creative and cultural industries, and whether this innovation is specifically targeted at the needs of Generation Z. And then sort of the third aspect of the survey was explored whether public and private institutions that have a role in supporting the creative and cultural industries, how they're getting on in doing that, and how effective they are in doing that. So it was quite a substantial survey with some really interesting results, and your presentation is very, very good, and I definitely recommend people go and watch it. Again, available on the 4HCREAT website. But one of the results highlighted in your talk was around the leisure and cultural interests of Generation Z. And before I go on, I should say that we have a panelist coming up, Juan Villanova, who's also done quite a bit of work on Generation Z, so we'll be able to go into more detail on sort of their traits. But one of the results highlighted in your talk was around the leisure and cultural interests of Generation Z. What do you see as the main barriers for young people attending, sort of traditional cultural activities?
Yes, well, as you said, there will be later on a presentation by Juan Villanova, who has made a very interesting desk research about Generation Z habits. Our survey that addressed over 450, was answered by over 450 young people from Generation Z, and to make some kind of underground research to double check their interests and also their difficulties or barriers. So it will be interesting to compare, in fact, both research, because in some cases we clearly confirmed the general global trends, and in other cases we had some surprising answers from our young people from our areas. The over 450 who have answered the survey all came from it's important to say, from most of all the partners region, and it was completed also from people young people and companies and institutions from all across the European Atlantic area region. So we had a kind of specific research from the Atlantic area perspective, which was something quite necessary and innovative. So among the different questions we had, we were wondering, of course, what were the barriers, because in our internal conversations with the partners, some of them manifested their difficulties to reach younger generations, to make sure that they could attend their cultural offer or purchase their cultural offer. And we thought that maybe there was a lack of knowledge of the cultural offer from the young people, and we asked them if they really knew what was offered in their town, for example. And actually, while we were expecting them to be a bit disconnected to this analog reality and so on, surprisingly, they did answer that for a large majority, they do know what is the cultural offer. So it's not a problem of information. In fact, as we all know, and it was confirmed by the survey, most of the information they received comes from social networks. Okay, so they are informed about the cultural offer. They know what is going on around them. They are informed mostly by social networks, but also by their friends and parents, which are, of course, of great importance. But they do not attend that much traditional, let's say, analog cultural activities. They do attend and they do have interest in concerts, music. They would go to the cinema as well, still. But especially when it comes to on stage cultural programs or visit to museums and so on, the key answer from them is that they don't find it attractive or interactive. So there's a kind of lack of interest from them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And I guess sort of somewhat predictable, I guess. But one of the interesting questions, one of my favorite questions in the survey, definitely, was a question that was asked, and I think it was, if you had an extra 200 euros, how would you spend it, or what would you spend it on? And there were some really, well, for me anyway, there was some really interesting results that came from that. I was surprised by a few of them. Actually, I must say, when I saw the answers to the question initially, there was quite a cohort of respondents who said that if they had 200 euros, they'd spend it on going out for a meal with their friends. And I was thinking, wow, this is a generation that must be really impacted by the COVID-19 lockdown, because they can't do these type of things. But would you like to expand on sort of some of the interesting responses that came back to that question?
Yeah, it was a very, very, I think, interesting question to know a bit about their habits. We ask them about their habits in terms of consumptions. It is this generation is of great importance for the economy and for the cultural creative industries economy and tourism economy, mostly because they are decision makers and they decide within their families. But most of their cultural consumption is online now. It's true, and as online consumptions, they find it kind of free of charge, even because they find everything through internet platforms, or because the paid platform, pay-per-view platforms such as Netflix, for example, are paid by the parents. So when it comes to spending their own money, culture is not among their first answers. We expected it. It was not a surprise, but they did confirm it. Only 2% say that they will spend on cultural activities and 5% on books. The first answer, about linked to this availability of money, the most important one was surprisingly that they would save them.
Yes, that was very interesting.
22% would save them. They wouldn't spend it, or they would save part of it. And afterwards, as you said, a quite relevant percentage answer that they would either go out for dinner, hang out with friends, or travel. So that might save them also to travel. Then as far as purchasing goods is concerned, it will go mostly through to clothes and or technology. But again, we are talking about traveling, eating, clothing. The fashion industry is somehow part of the creative industries, but still talking about clothes, a bit less artistic ones, and technology mostly. A bit of sport, and that's it. Yeah.
What was also interesting, I found, like when I saw the results, I was thinking, wow, there's like 17% want to hang out with friends, 17% want to travel. They are both things now that you can't do for the last few months because of COVID-19. Yes. But the other interesting thing was the clothes. Yeah, I wasn't surprised by seeing that, 16% would buy clothes. But you also asked them, how would they buy them? Would they be buying them online, or would they be going into shops? I was shocked by the responses.
And so was I, actually. We didn't expect these answers. When you check international studies about Generation Z habits, most of them will tell you, and I trust they are well done studies, they will tell you that they buy mostly online. But the 460 something young people from the Atlantic area who have answered our surveys say that 70% of their, as you can see on this slide, yes, below, 70% of their habits, purchase habits, are physically in the shops still. Only in Scotland, the majority of the answers were for going for online shopping. The rest, in all the rest of the Atlantic area countries, regions, both Ireland, France, Portugal, Spain, they did answer first of all that they will buy in shops. It is important to say that this survey was carried out 2 years ago, before this crisis that you mentioned, John. And I suppose that the experiences that we've had through the past 2-3 months will change some habits as well there. So definitely we have to turn our businesses more into online offers. Definitely they will buy more online. Definitely they are willing to go back to shops as well, and to normal life. But yes, I think it is, from a social perspective, it's positively surprising to see that it's not everything about their habits are digital ones.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree. And what was also interesting, I guess what's also worth noting is there's a cohort of Generation Z that are quite young. They could be as young as 12 to 18, and maybe they don't have access to credit cards to easily shop online. Maybe, but it's still a very interesting result. Yeah. Your survey, as I said at the start, the survey also asked questions of companies, and sort of were they innovating or preparing products or services for Generation Z. And about 60% of companies surveyed said that they had made changes to adapt to the needs of Generation Z. As a generation that is very much online, Ivan, if the creative and cultural industries wanted to reach this young generation, what digital platforms would be the most commonly used or efficient ones to reach such kind of target audiences, do you think?
Well, things are moving very fast in this digital world. So again, when we did this survey, some platforms were less used, and I think the #1 answer now is not actually in our survey, but has to be mentioned. I think TikTok to reach young people is now probably the most popular one. It was not 2 years ago. Now it is. But among social networks and well, according to the answers of the survey, YouTube remains the most important platform to watch online products, and Instagram, of course, for among the photography apps. WhatsApp is a key tool for communication among young people. And then, well, in third place, you'll find Snapchat and Facebook and so on. But yes, definitely, I would say now for both companies and institutions, maybe in this case also easier for some institutions, I would use TikTok and YouTube to reach these young people.
Yes, it's the TikTok is definitely a favorite in my house with my teenage children. I just got a comment in from one of the viewers, Ivan, and they were saying that in their opinion, the majority of Generation Z decide their purchases online, but actually buy them offline. You know, so they sort of shop online and choose what they want, but then maybe they buy them locally, yeah. which is an interesting point as
Definitely.
well.
Actually, they trust everything that is online. It's also a problem sometimes, but if it's not a question of trust, they double check everything online. So they will check prices, they will check opinions, they will check on Amazon as well, of course, for purchase of any kind of products. And yeah, this comment is totally right. They will check everything online, but in many cases, and also in some cases because they don't have their credit card themselves, as you said, or their parents prefer to go with them and so on. It's also part of the reality. They still go physically to the shops, yeah.
And then, as I mentioned earlier as well, you know, the sort of the third cohort that your survey questioned were research and academic institutions. So what do you think these research and academic institutions can do to help increase the innovative capacity of creative and cultural industries? Did your survey shed any light on that?
Well, there is, and it's a general comment for any kind of sector of the economy, but that is also created for cultural creative industries. There is still a lack of meeting point between the industry and the research or academic institutions in some cases, and in this sector they do miss it particularly. We have to take into account that the profiles of the companies as well. Most of the cultural creative industries across our areas and countries are micro companies, very small ones, or self-employed people. So even if they have a great creative capacity, sometimes their technological capacities or innovation capacities or just time is very limited. So there is need of meeting points and of taking, and that's part of the philosophy of the project, I understand, taking into account the needs of the consumers when it comes to developing innovative services or products, and pass them to the market. Link innovation to the market. It's of course a key issues. There are several answers we can read on this slide. to enhance innovations for the CCIs, they know they have to adapt design, quality, and so on. But they also have to adapt to some of the requests of in this case, we're talking specifically about Generation Z, about their fields of interest. So when we read there that only 9% propose to modify the company's culture and corporate social responsibility, actually, my recommendation to them would be to increase much more their interest on these issues, because social corporate responsibility and social linked issues are of key interest for their target groups, and are also a way to attract them. Then I think you were asking about research centers and institutions. Yes. They already have some also clear offer to cultural creative industries. They do promote some ways to host creative hubs and so on, to host small institutions and companies, and this should be more promoted. They should collaborate. There should be much more cooperation projects between companies and research institutions towards co-productions. Co-production is a key word for the development of any kind of product or service in cultural creative industries, and through traditionally cooperation was carried out mostly between production companies and companies. Now I think research institutions should join co-production projects, and or also from their research develop spin-offs companies, among other issues. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying that's very much all sort of part of the quadruple helix approach, isn't it? You know, getting the institutions involved and with the development as well.
Yes, definitely.
Ivan, we're just about out of time. Is there any sort of final thoughts you want to leave us with before I leave you?
Well, as a final conclusions, maybe I would highlight again, as I mentioned before, that the cultural creative industry is full of talented people, creative people, very dynamic, with a strong, they've shown during this crisis in the past few months, during the confinement, and also through the economic crisis that we've passed in the last decade, that they have the capacity to adapt to the situation and to also the market trends, but they need some support, of course. They have some very limited, most of them, financial capacities. There's lots of opportunities for them linked to this new Generation Z, and later on Juan is going to mention more of their habits, but again, they should take into account the social commitments, their environmental commitments, and promote environmentally friendly products which are attractive for these people. Of course, move to digitization and how to monetize digitization. Of course, co-creation is of key interest. There's huge amount of opportunities for the fashion industry. So cultural creative companies linked to the fashion industries, they should take them into account. We should take more use of transmedia also to promote digitization and co-creation, and again, cooperation and cooperation processes is probably of key importance to be able to join efforts and develop new products and new services.
Yeah, and actually some of those challenges that you speak of, you can hear firsthand in some of the podcast interviews that the project are about to release in the next week or so. Yeah, I've had an opportunity to listen to one or two of them, and I've heard of creatives talking about the challenge around finance and the fact that they're micro enterprises and all of that. Yeah, Ivan, thank you very, very much for joining us. Again, I would encourage everyone to go and have a look at the presentation. It's well worthwhile. It's available on 4HCREAT.eu. And yeah, Ivan, thank you. Thank you once again.
John. Thanks for inviting us.
Not at all, not at all. Okay, we're on to our third presenter. And now we'll be talking to Valerie and Marianne from Laval Technopole. Let me just bring them on. Let me just bring them online and ask them to join us. Hello, Valerie. How are you?
Hi, John. I'm doing fine. Thank you. How are you?
Hello, Marianne.
Hello, everyone.
Bon matin.
Bonjour.
Good. Thank you very much for joining us. Do you want to introduce yourselves before I give a quick summary of your presentation? Valerie, do you want to go first, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Short introduction. So I'm Valerie Moreau, and I'm responsible for international networks at Laval Mayenne Technopole. So we are a business incubator located in Pays de la Loire in the west part of France, and we are EU BIC certified by EBN, EBN being the European Network for Innovation. And on a daily basis, what we do here is really supporting entrepreneurs in developing innovative products and services. So,
thank you. And Marianne?
So I'm Marianne Mauvieux, and I'm the responsible of the policy toolkit.
Excellent. So the presentation, again, which is available online at 4HCREAT.eu, the presentation discusses the policy toolkit, which was quite a substantial output from the project, which Laval Mayenne Technopole developed as part of this project. And it highlights some flagship examples of innovation in the creative and cultural industries within the partner regions. And as I say, it's quite a substantial document, a really nice publication, again, available on the 4HCREAT.eu website. So the presentation also highlights some good practices that relate to the policy recommendations regarding knowledge transfer that were published by ICSTA, Lisbon University, which is another project partner. And we'll be talking to Anna Rita Cruz about that shortly. Valerie, can you tell me a little bit maybe about how the policy toolkit itself was developed?
Yeah, sure. So as Colin highlighted earlier on in his presentation, the policy toolkit really is one of the 4 key elements of the capitalization plan of the project. And so we have developed it with the support of all project partners, and people shared with us the good practices that they have been collecting throughout the project, and especially some very practical example which we have been able to put in the document. And this example just show the growth of the CCI, how the CCI have been able to develop, and how they can impact the local development. And so the knowledge and policy transfer that you mentioned, John, and which has been developed by a colleague from ICSTA in Lisbon, is also a key element of the policy toolkit. What we have done also on top of the element which has been collected by all project partners, we have been looking through European resources to find other example to put into our policy toolkit. And all examples have been classified in the document regarding the recommendations that have been done by ICSTA in the knowledge transfer model. So we'll speak about that a little bit later.
Very, very good. So there's sort of a mapping between the sort of
Exactly,
recommendations of ICTA and the best practice that you've published. And the toolkit, Valerie, it also sort of, as you say, highlights best practice that sort of broadly fall into these three recommendations made by ICTA with regard to knowledge transfer into creative and cultural industries. Can you just briefly explain these three areas? And I know that Anna Rita will do so in more detail later, but could you give us a quick overview of what they are?
Yeah, sure. So Anna Rita is going to speak about it later, so it's going to be very short here. So they have been able to develop throughout the project a lean model of knowledge transfer, taking into account the specificities of the CCIs and also the specific needs regarding the cultural and creative industries and in the specific regions of the project. So they have been able to outline 3 lines of intervention, and these lines of intervention will help to guide the regional policies to improve the knowledge transfer to CCIs in order to foster their growth and their impact on the local economy. So these 3 lines, you can see them here in the slide that you are presenting, John. So the first one to increase the knowledge transfer and entrepreneurship practices. And the idea really here is to encourage a greater transfer of specialized skills to the CCIs in terms of entrepreneurial and managerial practices. And then we come to the promotion of sharing expertise between the CCIs. So the idea is really to facilitate the networking and clustering activities among them, among CCIs, in order to increase collaboration. And here we can mention, for instance, the existence of clusters, of technopoles, co-working spaces, and everything to do with collaborative platform and also physical platform like Fab Labs. And the last recommendation which is found in the policy, in the knowledge transfer, is the generation of new business opportunities for the CCI. So the idea really is to support the creation and the development of new ventures, while always taking into account, obviously, the specificities of the market of a CCI. And so for kind of example, we can also mention university spin-offs and acceleration programs and things like this. So the good practices that we have collected and that we put in the policy toolkit have been classified according to these 3 recommendation and policy lines.
I understand. And there's like, I know in your presentation, you highlight, you know, I forget exactly how many, 4 or 5 or 6 best practices, but in the toolkit itself, there's quite a number. So it's definitely worth downloading and reading. Marianne,
there are 19 in the
19, yeah, okay, well, so definitely, Marianne, one of my favorite examples of innovation in the creative and cultural industries that the policy toolkit highlighted was that of La Machine Company, yeah, really in Nantes in France. It sounds like an amazing creative company that produces amazing machines, and I believe actually the artistic director or the owner of the company wrote sort of the forward to the toolkit, if I understand right. But can you tell us a little bit more about La Machine Company and what they do?
Of course. So La Compagnie La Machine is a street theater company founded in 1999 in Pays de la Loire. So now they have 20 employees. And it started thanks to artists, technicians, and theater designer working together for the construction of unusual theater objects. And the work that they develop in public spaces relates in the first instance to theater, urban planning, and architecture. So during the policy toolkit, we interviewed François de la Rosière, that is the artistic director of this company. And he expressed to us the importance of putting together technology, art, science, and innovation, and that we have to keep in mind the power of dreaming to imagine and design modern cities. So during the show, the company flew the streets with giant machine and 6 for direct contact with the viewer in order to create a disturbance, inviting them to glance at each other. And their machine accelerate economic exchanges with their cultural events, thus creating value and generating wealth on the territory. So for example, last year, the company had 14% increase in visitor compared to 2018. And this durable and touristic machine offer themselves up like a daily spectacle and thus contribute to boosting the attractivity of the region.
Yeah, they really sound like an amazing company, and the artistic director, he seems quite inspirational. I was reading the foreword to the policy toolkit last night, and yeah, he seems like a real motivator. He's in a really interesting space. Marianne, design thinking was another one that sort of caught my eye. And it's obviously quite a popular practice at the moment across many sectors, and was one of the many best practices highlighted in the area of knowledge transfer and entrepreneurship. Did you come across any interesting examples of its use in the creative and cultural industries that particularly caught your attention?
Mm-hmm. So, as you know, the design thinking provides a solution-based approach to solving problems by means of an iterative process in which entrepreneurs seek to understand the user. And this methodology is at the heart of our 4HCREAT project, where we seek to understand the needs of end user, especially of Generation Z. And this is why we have developed a training module during the project to train trainers to design thinking. And so we have one interesting example that we can share. It's about the development of the commercial offer of one of the companies we support at LMT, that is Artify. And Artify deals with art and technology in order to bring art into home and business. And their first business idea was to sell high-resolution TV, connected screen, with a library of digital content made of old and contemporary artworks. And so they used design thinking processes, and after several months of observation, customer interview, competition analysis, ideation, they finally came to the conclusion that one of the biggest added value they could offer was art mediation. So this is why they developed new services, integrated cultural mediation for improvement of well-being in companies, team building, commercial events, etc. And during the lockdown that we all lived, Artify showed high agility skills as they adapt their services on the online platform. And they have been able not only to develop a new service, but they still offer after lockdown, and they quickly managed to make it profitable.
Yeah, very interesting. Like, there's no doubt about it. One of the strengths of design thinking is the end user approach. It's so user centric. It's really good, and I really enjoyed. Actually, I attended that training that you speak of in Laval Technopole. It was excellent. I see on the slide in front of me the youth media team from Ireland, and being from Ireland, of course, I can't let it pass without mentioning it. Yeah, the youth media team are a really, for me anyway. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but they're really interesting group of young people who go and interview people at conferences. It was interesting. They started off as a group of young people who attended a conference, and they started interviewing people at conferences, and then other conference organizers started hiring them to do the interviews at their conferences, and they became sort of like a media outlet that you could hire to cover your conference. What do you think made them best practice, Marianne?
Yeah, it was a really good practice to know about. And in my opinion, the added value of this youth media team is that it underlines the confidence placed in the students, and all this turned to be successful. And this allowed the organizer to get their full involvement in the event. Working with Generation Z means giving them autonomy and relevant training. And for example, the most important event the team participated in was the interview in 2018 with the President of the Republic of Ireland, Michael G. Higgins. And this shows how the teenagers are trusted. So this good practice is also easy to organize, including class and local media. And with this such good practice, we can highlight the link between new technologies and the notion of initiative, which is the driving force for creation and innovation.
Absolutely. I must say what was interesting about the interview you speak about with Michael D. Higgins, the President of Ireland, was at that conference, you know, there was anywhere the president goes, just like the president of any country, wherever the president is, there's always a lot of media attention around him, and journalists from big newspapers and television networks. Yet it was the youth media team that the president spoke to for the longest. He, you know, I think people like to speak to young people, and they like to give young people an opportunity. So for selfish reasons, from sort of for conference organizers, it's quite clever to get young people to do the interviewing, because I think the interviewers can give more of their time. So yeah, it's a really interesting case study, and actually a case study that a video case study was produced on it as part of the project. Marianne, thank you very, very much. Valerie, can I go back to you? Just, we're almost out of time. The toolkit, is it available? Can I download it? Can I get my hands on it?
Yeah, sure. Do you mind to get on to the next slide, John? And yeah, here
Sure.
we are. Thank you. So indeed, the toolkit is available on the project website in the output and result page. And we have wished to make easy to read and document, which is going to be really practical to use and to display the outcome of the project to the third parties. So the idea now is to disseminate the policy toolkit through networks and social networks, and we want to distribute it to local authorities, enterprises, business support organizations, all stakeholders of the project throughout Europe, and especially in the Atlantic area region. And what we did also is that this policy toolkit is going to be available also in paper format, in hard copies. So anyone wanting to download it, you can do it straight now on at the end of a webinar on the project website, or just sending us an email.
Yeah, excellent. And as I said, I actually had a chance to have a look at it last night, and it looks really good. It's quite a substantial publication. Looks really good, very colorful, easy read, and some really, really great stories in there. A great source of inspiration, I think, for anyone working within the creative and cultural industry. So yeah, you're to be congratulated on it. It's excellent. Valerie and Marianne, thank you very, very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Again,
Thanks,
I would
John, for invitation.
Not at all. I would encourage everyone to go and view the presentation if you haven't done so already. It's on the 4HCREAT website, and also go and download the policy toolkit, which is on the website. Okay, thank you very much, folks, once again, and we'll move on to our next presenter. So our next presenter is Juan Villanova. And give me one moment there now while I bring Juan on the line.
John.
Hello, how are you? Juan, good morning.
Hi. Good morning.
So your presentation, Juan, was titled "The Influence of Generation Z, both as consumers, employees, and entrepreneurs in the cultural and creative industries." Before we go into the presentation and I give a summary of it, do you want to introduce yourself, Juan? I think you might be muted there, Juan. We can't actually hear you. Oh, we're having some difficulties. Let's give Juan just one moment and see can he join us again. He's having problems connecting with his microphone. You
Hello.
Can hear us, Juan. You can.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Sorry.
That's fine. Don't worry. We can't see you, but not to worry. But we can hear you, which is the most important thing. Would you like to introduce yourself for the viewers, Juan?
Yes. Yes, my name is Juan Villanova, and I work in a consultancy called Elea Desarrollo, based in Asturias, the north of Spain. And this firm has been hired by the Avila City Council to perform this study work. Well, I'm very happy to be with all of you and ready to answer to your questions.
Super stuff. So your presentation gives an overview of who Generation Z are and the challenges faced by companies within the creative and cultural industries in capturing their attention. Now, not only as consumers, but also as employees and entrepreneurs, which is an important dimension of your presentation. You also provide a selection of good practices or good links, as you call them, in relation to the creative and cultural industries and Generation Z. In your presentation, you have addressed the main features of Generation Z, and it was interesting to know the classification around the 5 I's and the 5 C's. So for those who haven't watched the presentation, the 5 I's and the 5 C's are a pairing of words that were used to classify Generation Z, or methodology, I guess, that were used to describe Generation Z. What's your opinion of Generation Z and these classifications? Or, like, you know, there seems to be a lot of unresolved debate around the topic. You know, are these features mainly good or bad, or what are your thoughts on it, Juan?
Yes, well, yeah, I think all these features affect in a different way to each individual, of course, and I think all of them have positive and negative aspects. For example, let's take the hyperconnectivity. If we think about this feature, okay, hyper-connected person will in general lead to expertise in internet, and of course, this is always something useful, you know. But at the same time, we could say that an hyper-connected person often implies to be somebody with, yeah, let's say poor skills in non-virtual relations, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take another example. When we talk, for example, about immediacy, another big I. I mean, this attitude of I want everything here and now. Well, the positive aspect of immediacy has to do sometimes with flexibility, with efficiency, with commitment. But on the other hand, I mean, the negative part could be like, I mean, still there will be a lot of tasks that need other skills, like more persistency and a longer span of attention. In that way, perhaps Gen Z people won't be so strong. You see, in the end, my opinion is that with Gen Z in command, the world won't be better or worse. It will be just different, you know, and adapted to Gen Z strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of sort of helping describe Gen Z, though, isn't it? Those 5 I's and 5 C's. I certainly found it. I certainly found it useful. What would you say are the main strengths of Gen Z?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. As I was saying, all these C's and I's have their advantages and disadvantages. You know, but if you ask me for my opinion on the strengths, I would say that, well, first of all, connectivity is a strength. This generation C is the first to be considered as digital natives, and this is definitely a strength, and a strength nowadays, if we consider the importance of being connected and familiar to everything related to the internet. Besides, I would say their multitasking skills are also a strength. I think in my presentation I highlighted or I mentioned the example of a 16-year-old boy or girl that is capable of watching a documentary in a streaming platform while chatting in the mobile phone, and at the same time performing some kind of academic task in the laptop, in the computer, while her or her parents look at that picture like what are you doing? Are you doing something?
Yes.
Yeah, well, they are capable of doing that. Yeah, let me tell you another strength I would like to highlight. This Gen Z is very irreverent, and that could sound bad, this word, irreverent. But I would like to focus in the positive aspect of irreverency, Well, this attitude of considering that knowledge is something accessible. It's not something that belongs to teachers, to experts, to wise guys. Knowledge is accessible at a click. We have, like I think Ivan was saying, they double check everything,
Yes.
That's because no matter who says that, I need to double check. I think this is positive. Yeah, let's talk a bit about another big I, influence. Influence. They are very, very influent people. In fact, I think it's considered the more influent generation. In families, for example, most of parents say that they are very, they influence relevantly in family purchasing decisions, vacation place choice, and all that. So this could be an example of something that is not necessarily a strength, but it is very important for cultural and creative industries to be aware of that and take profit from it.
Absolutely, like their influence within the household is something definitely that the creative and all industries are probably aware of, or should be aware of, and also that irreverence you speak of. I'd agree with you. Like, while irreverence can sort of conjure up maybe negative connotations, there's actually some positive sides to it as well. Like, it almost demonstrates a confidence with Generation Z. They're happy to question you if they're unsure, which in my view anyway is a strength. Another topic that came up in your presentation, Juan, was the close relationship between Gen Z and entrepreneurship. I'm interested on that. Could you tell me a little bit more about that, and particularly the implications for the cultural and creative industries?
Yes, that's another interesting point. The innovation, they tend to be creative, and that leads often to innovation and also to entrepreneurship. Well, it is important to notice here that when we talk about entrepreneurs related to Gen Z, we usually tend to think about extreme cases in which, for example, a 22-year-old boy develops a revolutionary app while programming in his bedroom, dressed in a pajama, alone,
Yes,
and all that. And then big companies get interested, and that guy becomes a millionaire when he's 23. These extreme cases may happen, and they happen, but of course they won't be so frequent. But perhaps it could be more important here and relevant, the concept of intrapreneurs. What is an entrepreneur? Is people that work in a company as an employee, but enjoys with the task of developing, for example, an innovative idea or project within the company. I think it's definitely more frequent to find this feature of intrapreneurs among Gen Z than as compared to previous generations. And again, companies have to be aware of that and take profit from it.
Absolutely. In your study, you also present some examples of good practices, or what you were calling as smart links between culture and creative industries and Generation Z. Could you mention some of those for us, please, Juan?
Yes, sure. Well, perhaps the first one, the more obvious, is the one related to the video games industries. I mean, in this case, it's quite clear the link with Gen Z. It's a product that clearly captures the attention of digital natives, and they like that. It matches their preference definitely. It's very important here to notice that in the case of video games, I mean, Gen Z is not only a target of this industry as consumers, but also as employees or even entrepreneurs. And well, in this case, we are talking about a very spread and consolidated industry. This could be a first example. Let's take another one. Escape rooms. Escape rooms. In fact, escape rooms are like video games without screen. They are based in a type of video game that is called or defined as escape the room style. And the component you see of challenge, well, is attractive to these people, to young people, and also helps to bring the culture closer to them. It's also important to notice here that in this case, I mean, escape rooms could be considered as cultural and creative industries itself, no matter what the theme of the escape room is about. But besides, some escape rooms in many cities base their enigmas in cultural or artistic subjects. So, well, this could be another, I think, interesting example of that smart links. But let's shift to another one, the cultural influencers. Cultural influencers. I think everybody knows what an influencer is, and I think we can agree that nowadays an influencer is an economic stakeholder. And well, some influencers are focused or specialized in cultural aspects. Yeah, Gen Z people pay attention to them. Perhaps not, they won't follow all the advices, but still, I think their influence is bigger as compared to classic marketing.
Yes.
Yeah, another one. Let's take. Well, I don't know, John, because I could go with more examples, but perhaps you could ask more questions.
Sure, you're right. There are a lot in your presentation. From another really interesting one is freak festivals, and so I would encourage people to go and watch the presentations. There's some really good examples in there. But just to move on ever so slightly, another one that caught my eye as a good practice. It sort of surprised me that the streaming platforms, Netflix, HBO, Spotify, because after all, we're talking about initiatives that are quite consolidated and for audiences of all ages. Could you explain a little bit more about those streaming platforms and why you put them in as good practices? Yes,
I totally agree with you. It is clear that we are not here discovering anything new with these platforms, and of course they are very consolidated and people of all ages uses them. But you see, the big point here is who brought them in. And I focus on my own example. For example, why do I pay for Netflix in my house? Well, I do that because some years ago my teenage children told me, what are you doing by watching classical TV? I mean, are you stupid or what? I mean, it was just an obligation to pay for Netflix or for whatever, you know. Yeah, and I think that's the reason. And in fact, if we think a little bit, streaming platforms integrate almost all key features for attracting Gen Z. I mean, they guarantee availability online in any device. They are always available. I think they are the best example of satisfying immediacy. I want to watch this movie here and now. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of languages, original versions, subtitles, without subtitles, whatever. The price is competitive, no subject to long-term compromises. So I think that's the reason, you know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It does actually, as you say, it does tick a lot of the 5 C's and 5 I's sort of box. And also it demonstrates the influence of Generation Z, just like you and your teenage children, with me and my teenage children. Again, they were very much the influence behind, you know, buying a subscription to Netflix and whatnot. So and what you also highlighted in your presentation, like that Generation Z account for something like 25% of the population, but they have quite an influence on the other 75% and their purchasing power. So really interesting. We're almost out of time, Juan, but could I leave you one final question? You know, in your presentation, the influence of Generation Z in many aspects of society, that's economic and others, was clearly highlighted. And you also said for cultural and creative industries to gain, you know, Gen Z's attention, you know, is really a must for competitiveness. I guess my question is, how is Europe positioned in this race, if you want to call it, as compared to other regions like America or Asia?
Yeah, it will depend much on the sector of activity. If we take, for example, video games industries, well, I think we could say that despite the growth of these industries in Europe during the last decades, well, it's still for example, United States and Asia have the lead. If we talk about cultural creative industries as a whole, according to some data I have around here, I think Pacific Asia has the lead. About 33% of the income generated by these industries comes from that area. But in the second place is Europe, and then in the third place is North America. Well, Europe is cultural and creative industries contribute to 2.6 of gross domestic product, and well, provide jobs for about 5 million people, you know. Well, besides all this quantitative data, I would say that there are still many opportunities for around cultural and creative industries in Europe. On one hand, we have to remember that, well, Europe is considered like the cradle of culture, you know. On the other hand, I would say Europe is still capable of adapting initiatives that come from outside, you see. In my study, for example, I mentioned another example. I mentioned the Burning Man Festival. I wonder if you heard about that festival. It's kind of annual events in the summer that take place in Nevada state, in the United States. They erect kind of artificial city, in the Black Rock City, in the desert. And it's a kind of experiment in community and art, you know, and it's influenced by a catalog of 10 principles that connect perfectly with Gen Z preferences, something like radical inclusion, gifting, immediacy is another one, leaving no trace. I mean, when that finishes, that city evaporates and leaves no trace, environmental concern and all that. So, well, this is an example of why not having a kind of Burning Man Festival somewhere in Europe sometime. Well, I leave it there
Sure, sure. Juan, thank you very, very much for joining us. And thank you for your presentation. Again, I would encourage everyone to go to the website if they haven't seen it already, 4HCREAT.eu, and go to the main outputs and results section, and your presentation is there. Juan, thank you once again for joining us this morning.
Okay, thanks very much.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Okay, next up is Ana Rita Cruz from ICSTA. And Anna, good morning.
Hi, John.
Or
good morning.
Good morning or good afternoon. It depends on where you're watching us.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for joining us. Ana Rita, do you want to introduce yourself before we...
Yes, my name is Ana Rita Cruz. I'm a research fellow in Dinamiacet, which is the Center for Socioeconomic and Territorial Studies based in ISCTE, the Lisbon University Institute, which is a higher education institute in Portugal. And well, my research is mainly around cultural and creative activities and also around tourism. That's mainly what I do.
Okay, and your presentation, which was actually given by a colleague, Rodrigo, introduces the report, and I have it here, the cultural and creative industries and knowledge production, specificities in the Atlantic area, and suggestion of a transfer model from public research to SME. So it's quite a substantial report. The report itself opens with mentioning how the creative and cultural industries have become a core part of regional and national economic policy as regions transition into a progressively more cultural and creative-led economy. Yet over the last number of decades, while there has been much attention paid to knowledge production and knowledge transfer in many sectors, there has arguably been less of a focus on the creative and cultural sector. So in many ways, this report helps address this failure. So can I start, Ana Rita, by asking you, what is the importance of knowledge generated in universities and scientific research for cultural and creative sector?
Yes, John, thank you. Well, maybe let me just start to say that, well, you have here the slide of this specific study, and everyone can download it for free in the 4HCREAT website, along with all the other documents that we have talked about this morning. Regarding to your question, I would say, of course, the higher education institutions can add value in multiple forms to the cultural and creative sector. And I would talk mainly about two. One, of course, is a little bit obvious and has to do with the human capital. But this can happen in a more direct way, which is the put available creative graduates which are going to integrate then the cultural and creative sector, but also in a more indirect way, which is linked with the maximization and embedding of entrepreneurship in the ways of teaching. The other form I would like to talk about is, of course, the research and innovation, because when we do research and we produce some knowledge about the cultural and creative sectors or activities, of course, we are generating a lot of information that makes also the cultural and creative sectors, because there are many sectors, to think about themselves and make some reflection and think the ways they are doing things and producing knowledge as well. And I would say that are the main two ways of adding value to the cultural and creative sectors.
Yes, and you mentioned sort of how diverse the sector is. It really, really is. You know, the classification of creative and cultural industries by EU sort of is an all-encompassing classification. There's everything from visual artists to graphic designers to filmmakers to theaters. It's quite a challenge, I suspect, around in relation to knowledge transfer. But knowledge transfer is very much associated with the commercialization of science, you know, patents, R&D contracts, spin-offs. But are there other mechanisms more adapted for linking the cultural and creative sector, do you think, Anna-Rita?
Yes, well, you were talking about the diversity of the creative and the cultural sector, and that was a challenge for us doing this specific study, because we are talking about knowledge transfer for decades now, but talking about knowledge transfer specifically to the cultural and creative activities is very challenging, because it's economic sector with very specific characteristics that made this specific feature of knowledge transfer very difficult. And that has to do with the great subdivision into many subsectors that you were talking about: visual arts, design, theater, you know, but also the diversity of vectors. I mean, there are lots of companies, but also non-for-profit associations. So we have to look for that as well. And regarding specifically to your question, looking at that specific features of the cultural and creative sector, well, we know the knowledge transfer is very much associated with the science commercialization, patents, R&D, the contracts, the spin-offs, but the majority of these features do not apply very well to the cultural and creative sector. Sorry. So we have to look more for informal relations, internships, collaboration events, co-creation activities that can happen much with human capital. The human capital can bring many informality to the relations, and also the internships.
Yeah, it's something
are very important.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
something
John?
that it's something that can really help with the knowledge transfer, isn't it? That human capital transfer.
Yeah, exactly. And also the collaborative events, the activities developed by co-creation labs that also Ivan was talking about is very important in this specific economic sector. Because, you know, the university is very close in itself because it has a specific agenda, which is to research and teach. And in the side of the companies and the cultural and creative actors, they also have their own agenda. And this situation makes the two worlds very separated, and it's not always very easy to make them talk and share some knowledge to improve the cultural and creative activities.
You know, when I think about knowledge transfer, you typically think of it in terms of sort of science companies and tech companies. But I think this report definitely demonstrates the importance of knowledge transfer for the creative and cultural sector as well. It's equally important, but just the mechanisms through which the transfer happens are just that little bit different. And there seems to be more of almost a human touch required. It's much more about sort of human capital, networking, meeting, and maybe less analytical, you know, that you might find in sort of the sciences. But
yes, John, and I would add to that the key word here is the informality, which is not the main feature we traditionally attribute to the knowledge transfer, that it is much formal. It happens in formal ways. So I think here we have to work with the informality is the key.
Yeah, and that itself sort of almost brings its own challenges, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
like, again, like you working in a university sector, you know, when it's informal, sometimes it might not be valued as much as the formal disciplines, so to speak. Yeah, there's definitely challenges there. But this being being a transnational study, Anna-Rita, are there characteristics that cross all countries, or are there specific aspects to each country or group of countries when it comes to knowledge transfer?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about the study that we did. This study had the territorial scope within the regions participating in this project, which were from Portugal, Spain, France, UK, and also Ireland. And the first thing we did was to make a kind of diagnosis of each region about specifically the cultural and creative sector. And we tried to understand in terms of public policies addressed to it specifically, if they existed or not, and if they did not exist, which kind of policies were addressed to this specific subsector. And also we complemented this analysis with a statistical one. And by doing this, we were able to draw some conclusions on the similarities and the dissimilarities between all the regions we were analyzing. Well, about the Iberian regions, that we were able to group it because the situation was very similar. So we found a lack of statistical information on the cultural and creative activities. So it's very hard to analyze a phenomenon or other kind of thing without information. It's very difficult to find here information specifically addressed to the cultural and creative activities. Then also we found the lack of professionalization and concern with the managerial aspects, and also an excessive importance given to spillover effects. Then regarding the French regions, we found an excessive dependency on traditional cultural sectors and a lack of institutional management of the cultural and creative activities. However, it is compensated with a strong associative tissue. Now, regarding the Scottish and Irish regions, well, here we found strong institutional management of cultural and creative activities. And for instance, I can give you an example that is, in these particular cases, these two regions have a specific office to deal with the creative and cultural activities, which are responsible to monitor them and produce some information about these activities, which is very important. And also, of course, they give support to these type of activities.
Yes, I know we met some people from the Cultural Enterprise Office in Scotland as part of this project, and they do really, really great work. Just before I leave you, Anna-Rita, that point you make in the Iberian regions around excessive importance given to spillover effects in key areas. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and what that means?
Yeah, I mean, they are very concerned with the contribution that the cultural and creative activities can give in the future. But the thing, and it's a little bit nonsense, is that they lack all the initial stages of the process. So they are looking for the ends without supporting the initial stages. I understand. Yeah.
Anna-Rita, thank you very, very much for joining us. As I say, well worth a read. Quite a substantial report. Lots of detail in there, and also lots of detail in the presentation. If you just want to get a sort of a summary of the report before reading it. Yeah, thanks for joining us. And that report is available on the 4HCREAT website. And that's it, folks. That's our webinar over. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We had quite a number of attendees online. I'm going to leave you with just a message that came in from one viewer, and it came in earlier on when I was talking to one of the previous panelists. It says, along with the health system, the creative and cultural industries has been one of the main players during this quarantine. And thanks to the creative and cultural industries, we've all been able to stay mentally healthy. Concerts, dance shows, films, gaming, cooking, literature, art, comedy, everything available online. So we need to give our creative and cultural industries, recognition for this during the crisis, and I would totally agree with that. So I'm going to leave you on that note. On behalf of everyone in the 4HCREAT project team, thank you very, very much. And just to remind you that this webinar, the recording of this webinar, will be available on the 4HCREAT EU website at this URL, along with all of the presentations and all of the reports referred to in this webinar. Okay, goodbye and have a good day.